Hello, I want to welcome everyone, and I would like to thank you all for taking the time to be here on behalf of the Institute. It's our pleasure to have such distinguished guests from the ministries and the embassies of the world. The title of this session is National Strategies Towards Countering Hybrid Threats. And our first speaker, I would like to introduce you Mr. Ahti Raidal, who is the Deputy Head of Consular Economic and Cultural Affairs at the Estonian Embassy. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vasiliky. Basically, I'm going to go through a little bit stuff which we have experienced in the cyber field. I'll give you a little bit background, the evolution, what we are really running in Estonia, which is so-called a digital society. And then I'm reaching lately to the cyber strategy as there was asked about. So basically, for the background, as you most probably know, we regained our independence in 1991. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, so we were in a really bad place. Everything was dark, crime rate was high, no one actually knew how to run the country. So we knew we have to run the country, and we had a dream of a Nordic countries, which are very close to us. So, but we didn't exactly know how to run the stuff, but we did know how not to run it from the past. So there was a very stream for openness, and it also included a free information, free press, and free speech. So, and during that time, the digital world was opening. Don't forget that the World Wide Web was published on April 30, 1983. So it's a rather new thing, actually, thinking of that there was nothing online before that. So being very poor, very few resources, and very few people, we are having actually a little bit more than 1 million people are living in Estonia. And we were in a Stone Age. Even the machine typewriters were a very luxurious thing, and we had to buy them old used one from Sweden and Finland, for example. So there was an idea how to economize, because, you know, lack of people, lack of resources, internet just came online. So it was idea, why not to skip the checkbook thing, because most of Estonians have never even seen the checkbook. Maybe some foreigners in early 80s came and they had a checkbook. Wow, magic. No paper money, just you write something and this is a money actually. It's a magic thing. So we decided to skip everything. We introduced a thing called Tiger Leap, which basically means all the schools, all the public institutes were computerized and put online straight away. So we skipped the typewriter and things like that. So the idea was to have as less bureaucracy as we can. Why should we need a clerk behind the desk if computer can do it for you? It's just a waste of money to build up, if you're a new society, to build up the old bureaucracy, right? So now I'm coming to the kind of a evolution. At the beginning, it was rather messy because every government institution did their own computer thing, had a servers and things like that. So the communication was very weak at the beginning. Luckily, the government was consisting of rather young people. The prime minister were 32, The foreign minister were 28, and average age of a minister was 27, 28. When I joined the ministry in 1996, the average Estonian diplomat was 24 years old. So I was an oldie, I was 25 then. So everybody did their own, and then it was, as everybody were young, society was very small, so the visionaries somehow started to come up. And there was idea, why do everybody do their own job? Let's put the computers to talk to each other. And then the so-called crossroads system in Estonia was built. Basically, it's a unified governmental database and service, which every single ministry, let's put it that way, has their own data, what they need. For example, for a social affairs, they need how many children you have, do they go to school, and to provide a social services. For a Ministry of Defense, they just need a couple of different things. So it was built up a crossroad system which all the governmental databases are communicating each other, but they don't automatically share all the information. It goes just need-to-know basis. For example, right now, if you're going to you apply for a social services, for example, in Estonia, and you need renew your address. So it's only once asked situation. If you enter your new address on the social services, all the governmental services already automatically know your new address. It doesn't show up in the system straight away. It's only then the official asks, then it's updated. So the data protection goes hand in hand. In Estonia, if some governmental clerk is looking at your data, you will get an alert. You can program it so you can get it on your phone, and you can easily ask, okay, guy from Defense Forces looked at my background. Why? So you can always double check that your data is not misused. So X-Road is basically like a brain. The neurons are running wild, and it physically looks like a brain system. It's not the one server, it's a thousands of servers talking to each other and working. So the point is not to have a one single data collection, because it might be vulnerable. If you hit that one, all the data might be corrupted. So it's the dispersion of information is very important to avoid the threats, at least to minimize them. So from that forward, everything started to evolve more. Like we were a first country introducing electronic voting in 2005. Right now, the electronic voting is most popular way. We had a parliamentary elections in March this year, and more than half, actually, 51% of the people voted electronically. So basically, you can do it from a mobile phone. You can elect your parliament. But everything was fine, and everybody were happy until the 2007 April. Then it was a organized cyber attack. So it was actually fun. Everything was down. Nothing worked for 3 days. You couldn't enter your bank. All the governmental web pages didn't work properly. So it was a wake-up call for everybody. And being on that time also a NATO member, we were lucky to have the ownership right now of a NATO cyber center in Estonia. It started only 6 nations, like Latvia, Germany, Lithuania, Slovaks, and Spain. And right now, in May, we had a 39 members already, including Japan, Ireland, and Ukraine joining us. The other thing we did, and we learned from these attacks, that we need a backup. We do have a experience from the history. 1940 we were occupied, so we need we understood we need some kind of backup on digital information we are collecting on our citizens or the state. And we are very good at restitution. Basically, after regaining independence, everything started from the scratch. All the data, all the ownership, everything was going back to the 17th of June 1940. So if you need restitution, it's very nice to have a backup. So after a couple of years, we had established the first digital embassy in Luxembourg. Actually, all the Estonian data, what the government is collecting, is basically mirrored in Estonian servers in Luxembourg. Why it took even 3 years? Because it's a completely new thing. It's like it is a digital embassy, and as it is unregulated was back then, so it's like the embassy premises in physical ones, it's exterritorial. It's basically somewhere in Luxembourg where a bunch of Estonian servers, which are actually Estonians, which is in Estonian soil. Now we have a backup. Now we have at least backup. If something really bad happens, we do have Estonian state still existing, but electronically. Everything will be in Luxembourg, not our physical bodies. Now maybe to the main point. What's the topic was? The national cyber security strategy.
Towards countering hybrid threats.
Yeah. So basically this 2007 was also a wake-up call. We need some kind of strategy, because as I described, it was before that it was kind of enthusiasts were working, everything was cloudy. But in 2007, yeah, we released the first cyber strategy, and right now we have a third one, which is updating process after the war started in Ukraine. But what is the goals and how do we see stuff? It's a horizontal strategy in that sense that it involves all the players in a field. The government alone can't provide anything. It includes also a public sector and national defense also. We even do have a so-called a cyber command under the defense forces, and the thing we are calling a defense league. The later one is actually like a national guard. So the computer enthusiasts, out of their own time, they gather, they learn, they fight the baddies, they try to hack the baddies, and they play the games, they learn, and they are ready to fight when it's needed. We also see that the providers of services, which is important for a functioning, the healthy society, like the banks, whatever, is also needed to be covered by the strategy. And of course, the entrepreneurs, the people, the companies who are working on a cyber field or whatever electronic field, they should be involved also. And of course, the research and development, which goes hand in hand. So it should cover all the branches of society. So what's the mindset? What we would like to see this strategy is going to be. The main thing is, of course, the smooth functioning the society, including the digital society. But we have learned it's rather hard to do the things alone, so we relying on the joint efforts on the institutions I mentioned earlier, and of course the NGOs and the foreign partners also. In Estonia also, the cybersecurity is widely actually known, and everybody knows that they do have a role to play. We called it a cyber hygiene. I will come back a little bit later. And of course, as I mentioned, 51% of the people are voting online, so we do have a trust amongst the citizens to trust the e-state. In our case, I'm from a government, I'm here to help. Sounds very reasonable. So, in our strategy, there are kind of a principles we would like to see on cyber field, on the internet. This is also includes protecting the fundamental rights and freedoms in the internet, because we consider this is a part of our social society. It's not the two different worlds you are living at. You have to somehow combine. So the freedom in the internet should be as well as in real life. As Estonia is relying very much on a digital field, so everything cyber, it is basically a driving force in Estonia. We do have a most unicorns per capita in Europe, as well as supermodels. So this is a good thing to know. So the unicorns and supermodels, they are going hand in hand. And of course, the security all the security must support innovation, and the innovation must support security. So if you do something, it has to be a secure and innovative. Otherwise, it doesn't make any point. And yeah, as I mentioned, our society is basically very much on digital. The good question is, what governmental service in Estonia you can't do online? There is, they say it's only one, and it's not get married. So the government somehow considers you to be present in a physical way should be nice. Other things you basically can do online. We do not have a physical papers of a birth certificates, nothing like that. If you need it somewhere, for example, I'm coming to Greece and I need a birth certificate, I'm ordering a printout. In mostly, it's provided automatically in 3 languages, English, German, French, Estonian also. But yeah, everything is basically electronic. Our government working paperless also since 2005 or something like that. And in Estonia, as I mentioned, the public trust is the most important thing, and we really do believe that our data is protected because we can always check. We can always check what's going on. It's easy, yeah, it's easy. I'm going to the MOT with my car, and I don't have to worry about to send the papers somewhere. It goes automatically from MOT station to the Minister of Transport, and to the insurance companies also. They see it has passed. I can easily issue you a insurance papers, which are also electronic. You have to ask them on a paper. What our problems are? We are very small. We are lacking human resources and financial resources. With a population a little bit more than 1 million, it is very hard. And of course, there are still some bureaucratic stuff we need to get rid of, and maybe even integrating all this digital to our society a little bit more. So that's why we need a international cooperation. And what we are doing, we as a diplomats doing on a international field, we are trying to strengthen our connections with like-minded countries and working together. Some of them are here already. So we keep promoting a open, free, and secure internet. We are promoting again the innovative and human-centered digital society all around. We are spreading all our knowledge to everybody who are interested. We are going to introduce soon between Estonia and Greece a so-called a digital prescription, which means that if you have a prescription from your doctor and Estonian is coming to have a nice vacation in Greece, or the Greek is going to visit a winter bazaar in Tallinn, you don't need a prescription on paper for a prescription drugs. You just give your ID and in Pharmacio, the person can check that, yes, you have those prescriptions and life made easy. You don't have to worry about it. It's going to be soon. The test is right now going on. Are the system compatible? So we can enjoy paperless communication with each other again. Out of time. Good. I was talking too much. How to achieve all these things? It's 3 words: prevention, protection, and development. And I was talking about the cyber hygiene. Cyber hygiene is that in Estonia, from the school, all the children, even from a kindergarten, are told about how to act in a cyberspace. Not to give away too much your data, don't share your location, don't like the people you don't know. And the biggest challenges are, baddies are always a step ahead. There is an international turbulent situation right now. There are always be will of a world domination by the several groups or the states, and of course the criminal syndicates. And the weakest link is always a person who's watching the screen. Don't click everything. Think twice. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Raidal, for your very thorough.
That was too long. Sorry about it.
Oh, it's okay. We enjoyed it. Our next guest is Mr. Simon Postel, which will be joining us online via Zoom. He's the Strategic Affairs Directorate at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the French Republic. Hello, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. Dear colleagues, first I'd like to warmly thank the Foreign Affairs Institute for inviting France to speak during this forum, even remotely. It's a great pleasure for me to participate for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to have this opportunity to talk to you about some of our priorities, some of our strategic priorities regarding international cyber policy. To introduce myself very briefly, I work, as you said, at the Strategic Affairs Directorate of the French MFA, specifically in the Cybersecurity Department, which is quite new. And we are in charge of cyber diplomacy, and we work closely on that with ANSSI, which is our National Cyber Security Agency. As you all know very well, cyber has become a feature of modern conflict. Cyber attacks are carried on by both state and non-state actors, and cyber attacks are rising. They concern all of us, as you well know. They target our critical infrastructures, they target our critical networks and our strategic operators, etc., and our collective security. It is, therefore, we believe, our common responsibility to promote a peaceful, open, and secure cyberspace where fundamental freedoms are respected. I'd like to talk to you about what we do in France to do that. So I'd like to talk about 3 of our main priorities. The first one is about collective resilience and collective cyber defense. The second one is about the promotion of international norms. And the last one will be about addressing new forms of cyber threats. So let me begin with the pillar of collective resilience that leads to effective cyber defense. France supported several initiatives at the EU level, and we've made at the EU level a lot of progress in coherence with our strategic compass. First, we tried to establish cybersecurity standards through ambitious regulation. And I will take two examples. The first one is the NIS 2 directive, which was adopted earlier this year, with the main objective of ensuring the cybersecurity of operators of essential services. These operators, concretely, are companies that operate in sectors that are vital for our economy, vital for our society, and that rely heavily on ICTs. It's energy, transport, water, banking, financial market, etc. In practice, with this directive, these companies will have to take appropriate cybersecurity measures, and they will have to notify the relevant national authorities in case of serious incidents. The second example at the EU level is the Cyber Resilience Act that we are currently working on with member states. So here, the objective is to ensure cybersecurity of products. It means that we will introduce new cybersecurity obligations for a range of hardware and software products with digital elements that are sold on the EU market. In addition to the establishment of standards, we promote also cyber solidarity, which must be efficient in time of crisis and which must be conducted in a sustainable way in the long run through cyber building efforts. Cyber capacity building efforts, sorry. So first, we want to increase cyber solidarity to timely respond to cyber incident. Again, at the EU level, we are today negotiating the Cyber Solidarity Act that will notably create an EU cyber security reserve. We think that responding to large-scale cyber attacks requires reactivity. And with this reserve, which will be a pool of service providers, with the reserve, each member state and each EU institution will have access to high quality and trusted services without delay in case of a large-scale cyber attack. As proposed by our president, Emmanuel Macron, we will even go further as Europeans, because we will extend the deployment of this reserve to third countries, member of the European political community. We also need to enhance the preparedness and to reinforce cybersecurity at all levels in the long run, and that is why France conducts cyber capacity building projects with and to the benefit of partners and allies. So it brings me to a second example, which is a cyber capacity building initiative we have in the Western Balkans. France partnered with Slovenia to strengthen the cyber resilience of the Western Balkans countries, such as, for example, Albania, such as Montenegro, which, as you know, were the victims of very serious cyber attacks during summer 2022. Together with Slovenia, we are establishing a cyber capacity center, the WB3C, in Montenegro. The center involves French, Slovenian, and local experts, concretely to deliver training sessions on three main pillars: cybersecurity, fight against cybercrime, and international norms. The center is operational. It launched its first training session in May 2023, and others took place within this year. And we will launch a more ambitious training program in 2024 to meet the need of the Western Balkans to foster regional cooperation on cyber-related issues. And in the meantime, we are open, of course, to collaborate with partners on additional training sessions. In addition to collective resilience, we also support collective cyber defense, as I said, at the NATO and EU levels. And we also support the adoption of tools to discourage, to deter cyber attacks. At the EU level, we have the cyber diplomacy toolbox with a cyber sanction regime that we used, as you know, in 2020 against several persons and entities responsible for cyber attacks. At the NATO level, France supports the Allies' initiatives to strengthen cyber defense, and we've made a lot of progress since 2016 with the Warsaw Summit, when cyberspace was recognized as a domain of operations in which NATO must defend itself as effectively as it does in the air, on land, and at sea. For instance, with our allies, we launched the Cyber Defense Pledge that enables allies to voluntarily share their advancement in capacity investment with respect, of course, to the sovereignty. And we agreed to enhance this pledge during the Vilnius Summit last July. And most importantly, each ally now has the possibility to invoke the Article 5 of the Washington Treaty in case of a cyber attack that crosses the threshold of an armed attack. In parallel, we must work on defining common rules, because we think that the lack of norms gives free rein to competition between state and non-state actors that are exacerbated by the strategic nature of the control of cyberspace. Therefore, we need to support the establishment of norms of responsible behavior. This is the second priority I wanted to talk to you about. There is a call for norm that was at the core of the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace that was launched in November 2028 by President Macron. At the UN level, we're working on that. And you know that we agreed on voluntary, non-binding norms of responsible state behavior in the use of ICTs, and we must support states in implementing these norms. And to do that, we have a proposition at the UN level to establish a program of action, a POA. The objectives are simple: to give stability to cyber discussions at the multilateral level, and to be action-oriented for the cyber resilience of the international community. The POA is aimed to be a flexible tool. We like to describe it as an OS, an operating system for international cybersecurity, on which we could install various applications and plugins. As you see, we're taking strong measures to adapt. But in the meantime, we think that our adversaries are doing exactly the same, and cyber threat landscape is evolving. That's our third priority: promoting common understanding of existing, but also of future cyber threats. In other words, it's about anticipation. I'd like to focus on a particular topic, which is the threats associated with the growing market of commercial cyber capabilities. In recent years, we've been witnessing a rapid growth of a non-regulated marketplace for advanced cyber capabilities and private sector offensive activities, and they are becoming a fourth vector of threat, besides state-sponsored threat, criminal groups threat, and hacktivist threat. That is why France, together with the United Kingdom, decided to launch a joint initiative to curb the proliferation and the irresponsible use of commercially available cyber offensive capabilities. We held a multilateral and multi-stakeholder diplomatic sequence on this topic during the Paris Peace Forum last November. And we have three main objectives: raising awareness across the international community, building a large coalition of actors, and proposing a set of policy options for the sake of cybersecurity, of cyberspace, stability, national security, and human rights. These kick-off discussions have fed a dynamic momentum to elaborate policy options to address the threat and curb the market. And to develop this work, France and the UK will organize an international conference on tackling the proliferation of commercial cyber intrusion capabilities. This conference will be held in London in February 2024. So if I summarize our priorities, we think we need cyber resilience to ensure collective cyber defense that will be effective. We need also to promote norms that define clearly what we can and what we cannot do in cyberspace. And in the meantime, we need to anticipate future threats. Of course, and you know that well, there would be a lot more to talk about, so please do not hesitate to reach out. And thank you again to the organizers for giving us this opportunity. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Postel, for the summary and for being here, even though it's via Zoom. The wonders of technology. And our next guest is Mr. Hanno Trayhurn, which is the Counsellor for Foreign Policy and National Security at the British Embassy. Please start.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to this very important event. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think my intervention is probably going to be a little bit wider and cover the sort of the hybrid threats. Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Which includes cyber attacks, but also other types of activity directed by states that we consider to be a hybrid threat. So to structure my intervention, I thought, first of all, I'd focus on what exactly we as the UK mean by the term hybrid threats and give you some specific examples of our experience in these areas. And then I'll move on to give a brief summary of the work we're doing to respond to these threats. So firstly, starting with terminology, what exactly does hybrid threats mean for the UK? So let me start by saying that firstly, in the UK, we now use the term state threat as opposed to hybrid threat. And we do this so that we can underline that we're talking about activity carried out with direction by a nation, from a nation state, as opposed to, for instance, a terror group or an organised crime group. So this is state-directed activity. However, in this presentation, I may use the term state threat and hybrid threat interchangeably, so please do bear with me. So our approach is actor agnostic. So the world is not easily broken up into good guys and bad guys, and in theory, any state could conduct activity which we would perceive as a state threat. But of course, in reality, we know that there are some states out there, I won't necessarily name names at this point, who pose more of a threat to us in this area than others. So to give you our official definition of a state threat, we have come up with this formulation, which is overt or covert action by foreign governments, which falls short of armed conflict between states, but nevertheless undermines or threatens the safety and interests of the UK, either directly or as a byproduct of states seeking to gain strategic advantage. So that's our official definition of a state threat. And we've identified 5 main categories of threat activity, although there is overlap between the different categories. And I'll run through them now, just giving some specific examples of how we, as the UK, have experienced this type of threat so far. This is very much not an abstract concept for us. This is all real activity that we've experienced in the UK. So first of all, physical threats to people. So this could include harassment or assaults on UK soil, or even assassinations. We've had some pretty high-profile examples of this recently. In March 2018, Russian intelligence operatives poisoned Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Mr. Skripal was a former Russian military officer, and they poisoned him with a nerve agent Novichok on the streets of the town of Salisbury in West England. And tragically, 2 individuals who had absolutely no connection with the initial incident subsequently died, and the incident cost at least £73 million of damages in terms of disruption to the local economy. Meanwhile, in 2022, so last year, our intelligence agencies responded to 15 credible physical threats by the Iranian regime to kill or kidnap British or UK-based individuals on UK soil. The second category is threats to assets and systems. And so we've heard a lot about cyber attacks in particular today from Ahti and from Simon in Paris. And we're talking here about cyber attacks, but we could also be physical or economic attacks on critical infrastructure. Plenty of examples here, and I think Ahti's example of what happened in Estonia is as good as any you could care to imagine. But a further two that we thought we'd mention was in 2017, we, along with our American colleagues, found that North Korea was to blame for the Wanna City malware attack, while in 2021 we attributed interference with Microsoft Exchange services in the UK to China. And here, just a further plug for the conference that Simon mentioned during his presentation in London next February in Lancaster House, which is focused on commercially available cyber intrusion capabilities, not necessarily state actors. But we're hoping to secure high-level Greek attendance at that conference, not just from the government, but also from civil society and other commercial and academic experts in Greece. The third category of threats is information acquisition, which includes our sort of traditional concept of espionage. But it also includes not just targeting of classified government data, but also academic, industrial, or commercial material via intelligence or indeed cyber activity. We've got a good example of this here from 2017, where a UK-based engineering firm called Smiths Harlow entered into a deal with a Chinese firm, Futures Aerospace. So Smiths Harlow shared its knowledge with Futures Aerospace, which subsequently abandoned the deal between the two companies. However, all the information that had been passed to the Chinese company was stolen and used by the Chinese, and Smiths Harlow subsequently went into administration in 2020, having lost its cutting edge, which damaged not just that particular company, but the local economy, and at a larger scale, if you multiply these incidents, the overall competitiveness of the UK economy. Our fourth category is interference, undermining democratic processes and institutions, or targeting social cohesion through info-ops or cyber activity. And again, I think this has been a common theme for many of us in Western countries and in the US or across Europe. And there's plenty of examples. Just last week in the UK, we exposed Russian attempts to again interfere in UK politics and democratic processes through cyber espionage and in the targeting of high-profile individuals and entities. And we've also had examples of China interfering in this way. In 2022, January 2022, our security service issued an interference alert relating to the activity of a lawyer who engaged in political interference activities on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. And this lawyer had been channeling donations to members of parliament in the UK, but obscuring the origin of the money in China in order to gain access to and influence the members of parliament. And the fifth and final category that we use is shaping the international environment. So, for instance, this is using international institutions to attack the UK and our allies' interests, or misusing international legal processes, such as spurious Interpol red notices for political dissidents. A couple of examples here. We've had the implementation of the National Security Bill in Hong Kong, which introduced the concept of bounties on pro-democracy campaigners, several of whom were living in the UK. So that's a threat to actual individuals living in the UK legally. And China has also been attempting to raise, again, what we consider to be completely spurious nuclear proliferation concerns over the AUKUS agreement we have with our US and Australian colleagues at the International Atomic Energy Agency. So that's a flavour of how we categorise state hybrid threats. And now I'll talk a little bit about how we as the UK are responding. So our overarching aim here is to reduce the risk of state threats to the UK while advancing our global strategic interests in an increasingly contested global order. And reflecting the higher priority we're giving this as the UK, we've produced a renewed countering state threat strategy with 4 key pillars. These are protecting the UK and its interests abroad, engaging to build consensus internationally and domestically, competing to disrupt and degrade threat actors, and understanding the evolving threat. So we as overseas diplomats are obviously actively engaged in building an international consensus on this with allies such as our friends in NATO on this panel and here in Greece. And our work to understand the evolving threat is obviously an ongoing process. But I wanted to focus a little bit particularly on the steps we've taken in the UK on the protect and compete pillars of our strategy. So starting with Protect, we've transformed the ways our agencies and police work so that forces across the country understand the nature of state-directed physical threats to individuals in the UK, and the fact that in these incidents, different handling is required, and they have to consider the international angles to ensure we're able to continue to foil attempts to assassinate and coerce individuals, but also to call out these actions with the actors themselves. We've also recently overhauled our national security legislation, updating our fairly horrendously outdated espionage laws, and we've also introduced a new sabotage law to defend our democracy and institutions. And to protect ourselves from the type of information acquisition that we saw in the example of the Smiths Harlow company I gave, we've introduced new processes to prevent other countries acquiring our data or exploiting our research for their own advancement. For instance, we've reformed our academic technology approval scheme to harden our defences, and under this scheme we've seen over 50 Chinese students leave the UK who we knew to have a known link to the People's Liberation Army in China. We're also continuing to strengthen, and this is an important point, our critical national infrastructure. So we recently introduced the National Security and Investment Act, which gives us power to scrutinise and intervene in business transactions, particularly in key sectors such as defence and AI, where we think a state is getting involved with nefarious intentions. This represents a major upgrade on the UK's investment screening powers, and ensures our critical national infrastructure will, in future, be protected from outside influence. And it's taken us a while to get to this point, and we've had plenty of examples of where we've not sufficiently paid attention to this overseas influence in our critical national infrastructure. We've made lots of mistakes, have lots of lessons to learn, and we're very keen to share those lessons with our colleagues here, and particularly in Greece. And just moving on to the compete pillar of our strategy. So while our work on Protect is in many ways the sort of what you expect us to do in terms of defending our national security against states or hybrid threats, our work on Compete is designed to be more forward-leaning, recognising that some state threat actors are taking a long-term approach to eroding and weakening our free and open societies. So we want to contest state activity which intentionally seeks to undermine our interests or destabilise the international system. And we're using the terminology chronic risks in the UK to talk about these longer-term challenges. An example I could give you is critical minerals, where we know China is seeking to dominate our supply chains to increase our reliance on them and reduce our ability to act independently. And we're refocusing our efforts upstream here, for example, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, and in Africa to address this chronic risk to us. And I think we would put energy security, particularly in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in the same bucket of critical risks. We're also focused on hearts and minds and focusing our upstream efforts on influencing the positions of non-aligned states and the global middle ground. Linked to this, we're working to protect against the erosion of international rules and standards, which we think some certain states are attempting to achieve slowly and particularly in multilateral fora. So we want to work with our allies and partners to reinforce stable competition between states, promote a rules-based system, and reduce the space for state threat actors to exploit the gaps here. And again, we're working to protect the multilateral institutions that we rely on. So I think I'll stop there, but just to conclude, I hope I've given you a flavour of how we as the UK have defined, experienced and commenced work to tackle what we call the overall bucket of hybrid or state threats, of which cyber is a really key part. But it's not just limited to cyber attacks, it's all kinds of other activity directed by a state which harms our interests. And as we move into an increasingly polarised world and the threats that we face become increasingly complex, it's more vital than ever that we as NATO allies work together to strengthen our individual and collective resilience against these threats. So we'll continue to work together to set the conditions to reinforce stable competition between states, promote the rules-based system, and reduce the space for state threat actors to exploit gaps in our territories, online, and in multilateral fora. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a comment, if I may. It's very interesting that you're just including in the definition states and non-state actors, or not any groups at all, and just states. That's very interesting for me.
We have other strategies designed towards
Yeah.
non-state actors as well, but we've found that the most logical way for our system to organise itself is to address the fact that these are state-directed operations.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Mr. James Morris, who is a political counselor at the U.S. Embassy. Thank you so much for coming. The floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. So I'm going to speak mostly on the current U.S. cybersecurity strategy, which was released only in March of this year, but is an updated version of many pre-existing cybersecurity strategies. And I think as the last speaker, you'll notice that there are a lot of similarities amongst all the countries that have spoken today. But the U.S. cybersecurity strategy is really designed to reflect our values. And so the first one is our economic security and prosperity. The second being respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. The third being trust in our democracy and democratic institutions. And three, building an equitable and diverse society. As we look at how we achieve that, the strategy basically breaks this up and allocates roles and responsibilities within cyberspace. What's new in this strategy is really two things. The first is that there's a recognition that putting the responsibility on the end user doesn't work. And I think we can all sympathize with that as people who are, active in the cyber realm. And so essentially governments, our government and industry need to take on a greater responsibility to design systems and implement systems that are innately more secure, so that the burden is not being put on the end user to secure their own selves online. And then the second piece of what's new is essentially a more long-term investment in prevention, again, working with industry to build more resilient systems rather than responding to the latest attack and incident. There will continue to be the latest attacks and incidents, no doubt about that, but again, having more of a coordinated effort with industry towards building longer-term preventative solutions. That's very broad, but in terms of how we achieve that, first, I think there's really three ways that we look at protecting ourselves. One is defense, so looking at ways to defend ourselves against cyber attacks and making our systems better. Two is resilience, and realizing that, like all types of crime, cybercrime is not going away anytime soon. So how do we make them essentially mitigate the threat, but recognize that in the same way that we can protect our physical belongings from crime, we need to protect our digital belongings as well. And then the third is just making sure, again, that all of this aligns with our values and what I talked about at the beginning. So as the other strategies have outlined, we basically have different lines of effort. We have 5. One is defending critical infrastructure. So that is, of course, the federal government itself. I don't need to talk about, for example, one example is the 2015 Office of Personnel Management Data breach, originating from an entity in the People's Republic of China, which stole 22 million government records, including my own. So that is one example of, and we see this ongoing again. 2016 U.S. elections interference, which was attributed to Russia. So again, protecting our own government infrastructures from both state and non-state actors. Also working in greater public-private collaboration on efforts to defend critical infrastructure. So in the U.S., for example, I think one of the most significant was the Colonial Pipeline attack which was a ransomware attack on critical infrastructure and energy. I know similar incidents have happened in Greece. And then lastly is something others have talked about in terms of harmonizing regulation and decreasing the burdens of compliance. So second is disrupting and dismantling threat actors, something my colleagues have also talked about. I don't need to elaborate. Again, there's a vast national security architecture in the United States. A lot of government agencies that have a piece of this. I think if you were designing a government from the ground up, you probably wouldn't have as many entities involved in this as we have. But again, there's the full force of the U.S. government is being brought to bear, both from a law enforcement perspective, a defense perspective, and an intelligence perspective. Third is shaping the market forces to drive resilience and security. So that's protecting privacy and security of personal data, shifting the liability of software products and services to promote secure development practices, and ensuring that our own federal grant money and efforts go towards building more resilient infrastructure that's more secure. 4 is investing in a more resilient security future. So this is a little bit of what I talked about in terms of working with industry longer term on more secure technology and infrastructure. And then last is probably what a lot of us spent time on, which is the international partnerships and combined efforts. And so, again, here we've covered a lot of this, but obviously, you know, speaking here in Greece, our biggest assets here, in my view, are NATO and the EU. So within NATO, there's a, you know, there's both a NATO dialogue about how you protect NATO itself, but then efforts of how do you protect the defense sectors of the allied countries, to include the United States, Greece, and all the other members of the alliance. There is, of course, a US-EU dialogue on cybersecurity and also on other emerging technologies in this sphere. As you imagine, there is, you know, somewhat of a difference in perspective, but again, I think there's a recognition from at least our side that the goal is that if we're working together on these things, the result will be better and stronger. And then speaking, you know, I of course work for the State Department, and there's an enormous effort going on in our own organization, just working with national governments on training and building capacity and resilience. And, you know, I was going to end by talking a little bit about, you know, when the war in Ukraine started 2 years ago, as horrible as it was and as dramatic as it was, one of the things that didn't happen was that Ukraine's cyber infrastructure essentially was resilient and survived in a way that we didn't see in Georgia in 2008, and we haven't seen in other similar instances. And so, again, you know, credit goes mainly to the Ukrainians for that, but in many ways this was emblematic of the cooperation that's been going on, you know, bilaterally between the U.S. and Ukraine, but also multilaterally with NATO and all the other countries that have a part of this. So I will end there because I know that we're short on time, but welcome further discussion from the group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Morris. And again, I would like to thank each and every one of you for being here and for sharing all the information and representing your country. It means a lot to the Institute, and I hope we'll see you again in the future. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break. You can go have a snack, and we'll be back in... Can we see?